Right, hi everyone. I'm just going to kick us off with a few scene-setting slides before we dive into the panel. So I'm going to start with something that's incredibly obvious. The number of mobility services on your phone has been growing over time. And the number of users of mobility services has been growing, now over 1 billion globally. There's also over 50 million drivers working for these mobility services. These mobility services are trying to do a lot more beyond just getting you from A to B. They started off with ride-hailing, taxi-hailing, starting to do carpooling and enhance the number, or increase the number of vehicles, the number of people in the vehicle at any given time, moving items around, food delivery, moving to 2- and 3-wheeler hailing, and particularly in markets where that's the dominant form of transport, so in Southeast Asia, getting really involved in micromobility, so scooters and bikes, starting to own some of the vehicles themselves in the form of car sharing and renting out those vehicles to consumers, and then kind of heading away from mobility into new areas, so things like mobile payments and developing autonomous vehicles. And going a step further and introducing some of these more exotic services, so things like what Grab introduced in Southeast Asia, a service for healthcare on demand, Gojek's Netflix competition platform where they're creating their own media content, introducing credit cards, and what I think is the most important of all is Uber's service where they offer transport for canines. This has led to these companies having very complex business structures that provide for all these different business units. It's incredibly complicated, and investors are finding it complicated as well. There's been a number of investments just within the last 2 years which have gone towards a specific company, say Uber or Didi, but investors have specifically targeted that financing for specific business units. So the question I'm really asking is this the future of mobility as a service? A giant, few behemoth companies that do a range of services and need separate divisions, and we have to go to them for our mobility, or is there another way? So to help me answer these questions, I'll come and take a seat and join my panelists. Gentlemen, you're all involved in this space. You all work in mobility service and mobility as a service. What do you actually do? Konstantin, if you want to kick us off.
Sure, thank you, Andrew. So at WireLane, we provide charging infrastructure, assuming that vehicles of tomorrow will be fully electric. So the way we do this is we try to create a solution, as we already heard, that makes it seamless for the user, for the customer to use charging infrastructure, which is a big problem these days. So anyone who has used an electric vehicle will subscribe to the opinion that it's very difficult to use public charging infrastructure. So that's what we do at WireLane, making it easier for the user.
And Liad, you work for HERE, or a division of HERE.
Yeah, it's HERE Mobility. And if to put it in short, we're building the complete opposite of Uber. If Uber builds a monopoly, which creates inefficiency, and we see in the Bay Area, in Manhattan, in other places where they are very dominant, that they only add to the traffic, to the congestion, to the problem that they promise to solve. We're building the opposite. We're building a neutral marketplace for mobility services to include everyone that are working in this space, to build a giant marketplace that create accessibility to all different service providers, either taxis, private hire, micromobility, public transportation. And also, we're adding efficiency to it and help them become more efficient. Only this year, we're going to save, just by providing optimization for them, we're going to save more than 1 million driven kilometers, saved driven kilometers to the world.
Great. And Felix?
So before I talk about Beyond 1435, I want to thank Anat and the entire Fuel Choices team for this great initiative. It's actually awesome to see how Israel taking the lead for mobility, for this great mobility initiative. So, and actually, my journey as well started in Israel 3 years ago, which brought me back to mobility. I started at Lufthansa, then actually started in e-commerce back in 2008. I moved to Brazil and came back in 2016 to Germany, thinking about what's next. I came to Israel. Everybody was excited about Israel. I've never been. And I met a lot of startups. They told me, Felix, well, you are in Germany, we're building Autotech, you should do business development for us there. Here, details, no salary, just commission-based. I thought like, well, that's not really scalable. But I was invited by Plug and Play to lead their German initiative, and we started Startup Autobahn, which is like one of the biggest auto tech platforms now in Europe, and I would say even worldwide. After some time, I moved on to co-found Beyond 1435, which actually was founded by Deutsche Bahn. So 1435, what does it stand for? Actually, in millimeters, it's the width of the railroad track. So meaning at Beyond 4035, which today is an open innovation consortium, the railroad industry wants to engage with players that come from beyond the core business. And that is where innovation is coming from in the future. And here we are talking about mobility as a service.
Right. So, I mean, let's just ask the question right away. What is mobility as a service? Is it a collection of different services that is available to the consumer through various different applications? Or is it a single product offering that's maybe a single price or priced in a specific way? Liad, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. So I think that the promise of mobility as a service should be consisted on two main pillars. The first, as you described, variety of services that help you to move from A to B in the way that is easy for you, that is the right way for you, and to have it available for you in an easy way. That's one part of it. But we have to have the second pillar, which is we have to create mobility efficiency in this mobility as a service paradigm. If we don't create better transportation, we miss the whole thing. We need to build a better future, and we can do that only by providing the tool set for people to incentivize them to move together, to encourage them to move together, to encourage public transportation, to encourage mobility and reduce driven kilometers by optimization. These are the tools that have to be taken when we build this mobility as a service ecosystem. And this is exactly what we're doing at Mobility, building these two main pillars. One, create platforms that allow accessibility to all different service providers. And the second, to really add value to the world and to the future of mobility and reducing unnecessary driven kilometers and reducing traffic and pollution.
So what you're saying, there's still a lot of work to be done in enhancing mobility service performances themselves, and there's work to be done offering a single platform to consumers or offering a variety of modes in a cohesive way to those consumers.
Exactly. You need to go through the whole pipeline. You need to go from optimizing the fleet themselves, and then you need to add a layer where you help them become better. Eventually, when you look at the rest of the market, which is not Uber, it's very hard for this market to understand what the tools that he will need in order to be competitive in tomorrow's world. What does he need? And this is our, I think, responsibility to provide these tools and to create this ecosystem for the future.
Konstantin, you've got a personal story about switching to kind of, I guess, a mobility as a service lifestyle. So you clearly think the product offerings at the moment are good enough and suit your daily needs. I mean, when was the tipping point that made you or convinced you that it was good enough to switch over?
Yeah, sure. Let me start a couple years back. So there is a very personal story to mobility as a service. First of all, what is mobility? It's obviously a necessity, but also it's a big pain, not only for us as consumers, but also for the environment. So years ago, when I built my first solar power plants, I was thinking about ways to go to the mountains, which I love a lot. I'm a passionate mountaineer, and it gave me great pain to realize that every time I went to the mountains to do what I love, go skiing in the winter, I contributed vastly to global warming. So the first thing that needed to be solved was the engine itself. Yeah, so mobility as a service for me, in an ideal world, it would be a fully electrified fleet, but also would mean ubiquitous availability of mobility and not ownership for sure. So the problem I had was quite a trivial one, and all the parents here in the room, they will know what I'm saying. I have two kids, 4 and 8 years old, and in the first years when they were really little, we needed the booster seat. So there was car sharing available already 6-7 years ago in my hometown Munich, not a problem, but once you stand in pouring rain with your 2 booster seats, you know what it means to actually use mobility as a service. So that pain was sort of relieved because the children are old enough now so that you can use cars without the booster seat, but also the availability of vehicles has gotten so much greater and there's so much more offered that it's turned into a very comfortable thing. So for example, Sixt, whom I don't work for, but I think it's an amazing company, and they alone have provided 250,000 vehicles for their fleet, for their car sharing fleet. So it's gotten much more comfortable to use mobility as a service, but that has taken time and involves technology. So for me, it's availability above all.
Yeah, and there's also a lot of local constraints. Transport is hyper-localized, so it's about finding the right solution for that environment or that area. Felix, you work a lot on intermodal linkages. Is that the key breakthrough feature for mobility as a service?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, from a user perspective, that's what you wish for, right? So you have this menu on your phone, on a tap, with the tap of a button, you can decide how to get from A to B. You know when you get there, what's the price? Is that the ultimate goal? Maybe yes. How do we get there? Let's see. I would compare it a little bit with e-commerce. That's where I worked before mobility. 2008 or 9, I joined a Berlin-based e-commerce shop, very small at the time. They sold shoes, didn't believe in that. But people told me, if you really want to crack the nut, learn about online marketing. The company was called Zalando, and I was heading business intelligence. At the time, we downloaded a lot of raw data of online traffic. So you get from A to B through different channels onto a site. Maybe you know where I'm heading to, trying to do a comparison. Say, as a shop manager, you're kind of the mayor of a city. You have different modes, different channels, and you want to understand what's the best way, you know, the highest efficiency to get consumers into the city. So we downloaded a lot of raw data to understand click chains, because at that time only last cookie counted was the way to go, and we wanted to understand, well, that's not true. You click through different channels to get there. So, you know, how do you value, how do you price different cookies? How do you price the different channels? So that's something that will happen in mobility as well. Take Berlin as an example. So in Berlin, there's a company called, Traf is actually not based in Berlin. It's based in Vilnius, but BVG, the local transit authorities, they're doing a huge R&D project with Trafi. It's called, it's white label, it's called Yelby. And they're offering multimodal services, so basically intermodal services. So over the next 2 years, they will collect a lot of data to really understand the different channels, the different modes, and then the key question is, how will you price them? What's the long-term approach towards the right intermodal setup?
Yeah, and also I think, sorry, oh, you need a mic.
I think that I really relate to what you said, and just want to add something to it. When we talk about encouraging people to go with public transportation as a backbone to the mobility, we eventually will need to solve in a good way first and last mile. And I think that the underlying term is collaboration. How can we create, even as mankind, collaboration between ourselves? There are so many smart people in this room and many other people in this conference and many other people in the world. Each one of them has a solution for something. And I think that eventually it's a shame that the market forces are the ones that create isolations. You have micromobility, and the micromobility company manager try to push as hard as he can his solution without any connection to public transportation or to any other even real need in the market. And then the ride-hailing do the same, and we create silos and we create closed gardens. And I think the way we really can solve transportation and build the future of transportation, which is one of the holding factors for us. It holds the entire economy, traffic. If you really want to solve it, we need to join forces, and the way to do it is to create this collaboration. This is exactly why we decided at eMobility to take the neutral approach, to be neutral and to make the ability to connect all different services to anyone that want to consume these services. So we're not having an application on one side. It's not our inventory. If someone is connected to our marketplace, it's the inventory that is open to the world, and this is the approach that I think can help us eventually win the game.
Yeah, but it also sounds like you're saying there's a definite role for more regulation, and then there's a role for government. So who should be the key linker of these platforms? Who should own the consumer touch point? Should it be, a city or a government, or should it be a private service that's contracted?
I think that if the regulation will help us to dissolve these barriers, I don't think that someone should own the user experience. I think it should be open. I'll give you an example. When we provide an access to Mobility Marketplace, we provide access, for example, for Barcelona Seaport. They signed and they want to use us. It's their responsibility, it's their user. They know what is their problem and how they want to solve it. Same thing with the digital wallet in South America that signed with us. They have their users, they have their experience, and they need to solve their problem. We have Eurowings, the airline, that signed with us, and they want to solve the problem for their passengers. They want to provide a door-to-door solution because this is part of their strategy. They want to have a bundle of the door-to-door solution. It's their users. It's not our users. It's not the city users. It's their users. And the ability to really open up all the mobility services to many different businesses, many different use cases, to cities or to a business or to an application developer, I think that's key to develop the future of mobility.
Right. Konstantin, I know you run an open platform. I mean, would you say that that's the key killer feature for future mobility as a service adoption?
Yeah, you raised an interesting point there, Andrew, and prior to this panel we had a discussion about this, and I think it's quite fascinating to see how private companies assume de facto governmental roles these days, right? So let me give you a little story about our beginnings. We started as a parking company, so we would organize parking for car sharing companies. We would do geofencing using technology to actually be able to do the booking and billing for local authorities, so that cars would be parked in a certain spot, and the community was able to invoice the parked car to the car sharing company. And then we're moving further and further away from that model to a system where a company like Uber, for example, assumes a de facto governmental role in many countries. It's infrastructure. I mean, they've really created infrastructure, which on the one side is very efficient because it's a privately owned company, on the other side very frightening something because we're fully dependent on them, right? So I think there's no simple answer to that, but I totally agree with what you said. In an ideal world, there should be a legitimate public impact on the way we organize mobility, as it's a common good for all of us. So there's no simple answer to that yet, but the regulatory bodies definitely have a big job ahead of them.
Yeah. Felix?
Well, we have as well to ask and provoke a question: is mobility as a service a viable business?
Yeah.
I mean, who's earning money, like profits, in this space right now?
And also, I guess, the scale of those profits, whether you're kind of looking for massive tech returns, high margins, or whether you're looking for more moderate returns from offering what could be considered a public good. And I'm sure that would get the attention of Mr. Alex Roy, who is quite an advocate for mobility, or universal basic mobility.
It could be that it will never do any profits. And then what? So if we provoke this question and say, like, maybe it's becoming like public transportation, which is mainly run through subsidies, then it could be at one point of the time we as a society might ask the question, do we want these services still to stick around? And what are we willing to pay for it? So I think right now, I did some snapshots through different stakeholders before the panel. So startups, VCs, corporates, academia, cities as well, and they all mentioned, so especially corporations, they asked this question. Startups and VCs not so much, to be honest, as well. I mean, they have insane growth rates. Mobility as a service. Let's talk about micromobility scooters. That's growing insanely. It's growing insanely, and that's as a VC, which, I mean, as a business, is a hit-driven business. You need these huge growth rates, so maybe you don't ask all the questions that you should up front. So we could run into a dilemma there over the next 3 or 4 years. We've seen now with Uber and Lyft Public that they have still huge losses, and all these scooter and micromobility companies do have them as well, though huge growth rates, and as well from a consumer point of view, the user behavior is there. So it's sticky. But the question is, like, is it a viable business in the long run? And if so, how do we structure it?
Yeah, and do you keep adding more and more services to these products? I want to get Liad's opinion on how you price these business models, and how do you control the pricing so that businesses have the potential to make a profit. We know a lot of the mobility service providers are not making a profit at the moment. And then how do you ensure that consumers get a fair price for transport in the long run?
I think it's a really good question. And basically in the market, there are 3 ways of reducing the prices. The first way, which is the most common way, is subsidizing the rides. This is the Uber's way, to artificially inject money into this market in order to grab this monopolistic position. And they even admit that they don't know how to be profitable in the foreseen future. The second way to reduce prices is go to the service providers and put the pressure on them. Let's say we're a marketplace and we say, look, if you want to work with us, you will need to reduce your prices by 10-15%. If not, you will not have this accessibility. And then it creates a pressure which will break them. Eventually, as you said, they are already working at such a low margin that it's very hard for them to be competitive in today's world, where there is the first solution of injecting a lot of money into the market in order to subsidize the rides. The third option, which I think the only way to really create sustainable way to reduce prices, is by increased efficiency. And this is exactly why it's a longer track. But I think that for the long run, it's much more rewarding. The way we do that is we help our partners, supply partners, when they stuck in the 20th century, some of them in the 19th century, to become much more efficient. So instead of working with radio and picking a driver that accidentally is the cousin of the fleet owner, providing them optimization modules based on machine learning, crunch all the data that they have. In my previous background at Waze was I built the whole data entities there and was leading the data strategy. And we take the same approach. We analyze all the data for our partners, on behalf of our partners, to help them become more efficient. And once they become more efficient, and we already see that now for future rides, we are able to reduce by 25% number of driven kilometers. And eventually it translates immediately to the top line of our partners. And they can then use this extra margin to reduce prices, to be competitive with Uber. I think that's the way that we will take from now on, to help them have more riders inside one ride, to help them predict the demand, to utilize the fleet better. These are the cases where we as technology provider can actually create value for our partners, and it translates to the customer journey and the customer satisfaction, and the end goal is to eventually help the Earth, help reduce pollution, help reduce traffic by providing it.
There's elements of the transport network that you didn't mention, which I thought of when you said company or entities stuck in the 19th century. So that would public transit. And I mean, apologies to anybody who works in public transit, because this is certainly not true of every organization. But is linking public transit, trains, buses, that's definitely. When you want to provide first and last mile to public transportation, you need to have a lot of information and really relate to our moderator here on his journey and the research that he needed to do. You will need to have a lot of information that will create for you a seamless experience using first mile, then public transportation as your backbone, and then last mile. And that's exactly what you can do once you have different mobility services under one in one access point that can be available and can be relevant to the person that want to take this journey. This is part of what we're doing as optimization.
Maybe I can add on that, reflecting a little bit about rail. I mean, rail in Europe is still the backbone for mass transportation. So the seamless journey, until now, it's not happening so much. So I mean, you don't have the one app kind of to them all, because you have to integrate ticketing and billing, and that's like I think the last piece missing here in the puzzle. Can it be an opportunity for rail and local transit operators? For sure. Can it be a threat as well? I mean, look at in Washington D.C. the occupancy of metro is declining over the last 3 or 4 years. So they brought in a Swiss startup, Teralytics, to analyze what's happening there and get all the in an anonymized way smartphone data, and people are migrating towards smart services. So if like people during the week, the occupancy rates going down like 25%, on the weekend like 40%, especially in the millennium age, what does it mean about public transportation in the future? And how do you cope with this challenge and find the right setup in terms of pricing to make it a viable business in the long run? And we have to ask the question about, if we think about cities and transportation reflected as equity, I mean, what is it worth to get people from outside the city into the city, and how should you then price your equity basically space and area. And maybe that's a way of thinking how you can build a pricing framework as well around multimodal transportation.
Right. And I want to ask each of you in turn as we kind of head towards the end of our panel here. We've talked about pricing transportation and offering a wide variety of services, but to be a compelling mobility as a service offering, do you need to go beyond that? Konstantin, I know you include charging and for other modes it would include other fuels, but is that rounding out the mobility service offering, or do you even need to go further than that and offer a range of other services?
Well, I mean, it depends on from which perspective you look at the problem, right? So if it's just about ease of use, then I guess we're doing fine already. It's moving into the right direction. But if you look at the impact of transportation regarding the contribution to global warming, well, there's certainly many things that need to be done in the future. So from a design thinking perspective, the ideal means of transportation has been invented long ago, and it's the bicycle, right? But this is certainly not going to scale, not going to solve all of our transportation needs and problems. So I think, electrification does play a major role in the future, but also deindustrialization, and that's the ugly truth, is also a big part of the game. So we all need to rethink our transportation needs and our mobility behavior. I think that's an important point to make.
I think that about pricing, we're not at equilibrium right now because of the extra injection of money into the market and subsidizing it. And also, there are a lot of researchers that show that price is not the only factor and even not the main factor, and create ease of use to use different services. As I said, collaboratively, I think it's key. Instead of each and every one will focus, like he said, electrified engines, it's very important. Public transportation, super important. But then combine all these different approaches and services. When we have the goal of improving and building the future, I think that's a key for us to really be successful on our journey there.
And about pricing, how will autonomous driving as well affect pricing in the future? So if you take out the driver from the equation, how is then all of a sudden mass a viable business in the future?
That's true. But unfortunately, that's a whole other area of conversation that we just don't have time for on our panel. We're already a minute over time. So
we are out of time, but that is such a great question that as your moderator and as someone who works in the autonomous vehicle sector, I'm adding 2 minutes to this panel because I have discussed this at work and also with my friends at the Autonocast on many episodes. This notion, Uber has frequently said that 70% of their cost is the driver. And they've used this as a talking point to suggest that when autonomous vehicles are deployed, level 4 exists, there's a defined fence that magically the price will just go down 70% and these savings will be either Uber's going to capture the savings as profit, or they're going to transfer it to the end user and it'll be like this utopia, or they'll split it. And I don't think any of that's true. I recently read an article. I'm sure you gentlemen know this man, David Zipper. He writes for CityLab. Have you all read David Zipper? Everyone here should read David Zipper. He talks frequently about why we should not have walled gardens, as you talk about, and there's this peculiarity where if you have an electric vehicle, and you can tie all these threads together, walled gardens, electric vehicles, autonomy. If you have an electric vehicle and you have a Tesla, even you don't really pay attention to what it costs to supercharge it because it's built into you. It's just charge your card. You just go to the charger, plug in. It's a frictionless experience. But if you have a non-Tesla, there's a little bit of friction. You're never entirely sure, depending on the network. You might end up in the United States at an Ionity network or Blink network or a charge point, and there's all this doubt. I know that people are willing to pay more for certainty. Even if they're certain it's not that good, they just want to know that it's reliable. And when I came to Tel Aviv, and one of my favorite cities in the world, but the thing that I never look forward to is using the Get app. Is there anyone here from Get? It just makes me crazy. Like an Uber, I don't even look at the pricing as I should look at how many minutes before the car arrives. So here's my question for you, since we have, I'm adding 2 minutes, and we should all take advantage. We have a break after this. Breaks are pointless. Let's learn. This is one of the best panels I've heard here. How long before the barriers between these multiple walled gardens are broken down and we have really efficient mobility traffic markets? Because I would love to get into a shared vehicle, a hailed vehicle, or an autonomous vehicle, and I'd love to be in it, inside the fence of an urban core, and if there was a button that said, for every dollar I spend, I save a minute. And then there's some kind of arbitrage balancing the fleets, and this fleet gets priority and other guys maybe get subsidized. How long before we reach that point? When are we going to see and break these walls of data and take advantage and see really efficient traffic markets?
Yeah, so if I may answer to that, I had a very interesting meeting yesterday at the guys of Orcam, which happens to have the same...
What's the company?
Orcam. It's a company, Vision Technology, and the founders happen to be the founders of Mobileye, which is probably one of the most famous companies here in Israel. And they have a very robust opinion on autonomy. So they say in 2022, autonomy level 4 is possible in Israel, which happens to be the case because the regulatory environment is quite friendly, but also technology is viable and it's there. It exists already today. So from our perspective as an infrastructure provider, I can only say it's so fascinating to see that so many off-the-shelf technologies, once you merge them, it turns to something completely new. In our case, for example, an autonomous charging robot, so that the issue you just addressed, it will be solved in the near future. We've already developed a product that allows us to actually charge a car fully autonomously. So in a safe environment, which means a parking, for example, we will see that scenario very soon. So I'm talking about 1 to 2 years and not a decade. So I'm very optimistic about that.
About your question, is someone is going to build this traffic mobility marketplace? This is what we built. This is exactly what Here Mobility is doing. We already have more than 2.5 million vehicles join the marketplace, so it's almost the scale of Uber if you think about it. And we are now very, very fast reaching the markets of Europe, North America, and South America. So we already have a lot of these ingredients in the Here Mobility marketplace. But one point that I think is important about autonomous cars, there's a lot of promise behind the autonomous cars. And one of the key factors that we measure as efficiency is car occupancy. Today's average occupancy is 1.1 per vehicle, which is terrible. With the autonomous vehicles, we might find ourselves with 0.7 or 0.6 on average, and this is very dangerous. If people will go from public transport into autonomous cars, we might find ourselves in an endless traffic. So we need to be smart about how we build this future. It's a great piece of technology, but technology without, on the wrong hands, can be very, very disastrous.
I hope so. Go.
So my answer to your question about getting efficiency higher, it's not about autonomous driving. I think first things first is like joining this multimodal approach. So basically, right now it runs in parallel mass and like transit operators. If you join them in a real intermodal solution, that could increase tremendously efficiency. And in terms of prediction, look at again like here in Israel what Moovit is doing with Uber in the US. So Uber Transit, we will see, I think, like what did they announce, 20 cities online next year in the US. So I would predict, yes, over the next 2 years we will see a lot of new efficiency coming up, especially US leading. Europe again is different. Cities in the lead there. Look at BBG in Berlin again, and so they will take some time to then analyze data and then come up with the right pricing solutions later on.
Well, I hope you're right, and I have to say this is one of my favorite panels I've seen at this event, and it's really, really terrific. One question for you, Liad. Do you promise me that police location will stay inside the Waze app? It's such a great functionality. But you're not there anymore, so you don't care.
I'm not
Oh, come
just, I
on.
promise whatever you ask.
There's
I
no
still
justice.
I still have good friends there, so I can call them on your behalf. So
Please.
no worries about it.
Find me after the show. All right, thanks everyone. That was a wonderful panel. Thank you so much, Andrew. Thank you so much, everyone.